At first glance, 25-year-old Jonathan Marshall and his girlfriend Emily Wayne seemed like an ordinary couple living on the outskirts of Baltimore. They had been dating for over a year and mostly led quiet, inconspicuous lives, renting a small apartment on the southwest side of the city, near the Pigtown neighborhood. Emily worked at a local coffee shop, and Jonathan was an IT freelancer who spent most of his time on the computer, working from home. Their lives were going smoothly. At least that's what their neighbors thought. But what went on behind closed doors was quite different. Emily often exhibited erratic behavior, which was only exacerbated by her obsession with Jonathan. In recent months, she had become increasingly withdrawn, alienating herself from friends and family, focusing all of her energies and emotions solely on Jonathan. The signs of her instability manifested themselves in petty recriminations, suspicion, and at times, paranoia. She scrutinized his every move, read his correspondences, monitored his social media time, and even studied the details of his phone conversations. Over time, her suspicion reached a peak. She was sure Jonathan was hiding something from her. A dark suspicion was brewing in her mind that only grew stronger every day. More and more often, Emily went to the dark corners of the internet, where she read frightening stories of betrayal and infidelity, all of which only confirmed her conviction that Jonathan was cheating on her. In her mind, it had become an immutable truth, and she was ready to do anything to expose his deception. One night, after another argument, Jonathan went to bed, leaving Emily in the kitchen. Her heart was racing. She felt a mixture of anger and terror, as if she was facing an insurmountable obstacle. It wasn't the first time she'd felt such emotions, but that night was different. An idea was brewing in her mind, and instead of dismissing it, Emily let the idea flood her mind. Emily spent the next day in a strange, detached state. It was as if she were in a trance, performing her usual activities mechanically, with an impenetrable expression on her face. Her neighbors noticed that she became less sociable and avoided meeting them, but no one paid much attention to it. She tried not to draw attention to herself, assuring herself that she was doing everything for the sake of the truth that must be revealed to the world. Evening came, and after waiting for Jonathan to fall asleep, Emily walked into the kitchen. Her steps were quick and decisive. She picked up the kitchen knife, feeling its cold metal in her hands. Her fingers gripped the handle tightly, and there was no more doubt or hesitation in her mind. This was inevitable. She headed toward the bedroom where Jonathan slept peacefully, unaware that his life was about to be cut short. Emily entered the bedroom discreetly, walking over to the bed. Everything she did next seemed crystal clear to her, as if she was following a well-thought-out plan. There was nothing left in her mind but fierce determination, cold calm, and a strange sense that it was all necessary. She walked to the bed without a fuss, and in one motion brought the knife down on Jonathan. Before he realized what was happening, his body was instantly racked with pain, but he had no chance of escape. Emily stabbed methodically, without showing any emotion, as if she were doing a mundane task. There was no regret or compassion in her eyes. She felt she was completing what was about to happen. With each blow, the certainty that she was doing the right thing only grew stronger in her mind. When Jonathan stopped breathing, Emily walked back into the kitchen without losing her composure. She knew she had to clean up the tracks, but she felt neither fear nor panic. It flashed through her mind that she needed to get rid of the body so no one could find out what had happened. She set about the elaborate destruction of evidence. Emily started with the bathroom. She used plastic bags prepared in advance and a few tools she had bought the day before at a construction store. Her movements were precise and measured, like a surgeon's. She felt no emotion, as if she had become a soulless machine. There was only one voice in her head telling her that everything was going according to plan. The work took hours. Emily took turns transferring Jonathan's body parts into bags and hiding them in different corners of the apartment. She knew she had to be careful not to leave any traces that might attract the attention of the police. From the very beginning, she realized that even the slightest mistake could cost her her freedom, so she acted with all possible caution. Emily cleaned the bathroom thoroughly, scrubbing every corner, getting rid of any traces of blood. She spent hours wiping away every trace, removing every drop that could give her away. Afterward, she checked her belongings, making sure there was no evidence left that could lead investigators to her. Her face was impassive, her gaze blank, and nothing in her demeanor betrayed the horrific crime she had just committed. Finished with the cleanup, Emily carried the bags of Jonathan's remains down to the basement. Her mind was focused on the task at hand. She considered the various options for disposing of the body, analyzing the possible risks. She weighed the pros and cons, evaluating each step. Emily was sure her plan was flawless. In her head, all the actions were clearly laid out and thought out to the last detail. She knew that she had to act quickly and carefully to avoid making any mistakes that could solve her crime. Waiting until early morning, when the darkness on the streets was beginning to dissipate, Emily began her carefully planned disposal of the evidence. The first thing she did was head to an abandoned plot of land on the outskirts of Baltimore. The place was deserted and rarely visited, perfect for getting rid of small, not immediately eye-catching items. Emily took one bag at a time, which she pre-packed and wrapped extra to prevent the possible spread of odors. She realized that vigilance was her greatest ally, every detail Emily had thought of beforehand. Her goal was to get rid of all body parts and objects associated with Jonathan, so that none of them could be found in their entirety or pointed to her. She burned everything that could possibly be burned and carefully hid what could not be destroyed. In the vacant lot, in the dense thickets, Emily left small pieces of cloth and other seemingly insignificant items that might have put someone on the trail. To her, it all represented mere elements that needed to be disposed of. Her mind worked without emotion, only precise calculation. For hours, Emily moved around the city, choosing places where she could leave fragments of evidence without attracting attention. She knew that the farther she spread the evidence around the city, the less chance it would be linked to her. She tossed some of the bags of small items into dumpsters located on the busiest streets, where garbage trucks emptied the bins in the morning. She realized that the trash would go into the city landfill, where tons of waste is dumped, and it would be nearly impossible to find anything in particular. That was her basic plan for hiding small parts. That same day, Emily returned home again. She kept a calm expression on her face, and nothing betrayed her inner tension. She knew she needed to make sure there was no evidence in the apartment and basement where she had dropped some of the packages. With one last check for traces, she finally cleaned up anything that could lead to suspicion and prepared for the next step. However, one important item was still in her apartment, Jonathan's cell phone. Emily was well aware that the use of the phone could indicate his location at the time of the murder and further disposal of the body, so she thought in advance about a way to dispose of it. She decided to leave it in a public place that would not arouse suspicion. The next day, during the morning rush hour, Emily tossed Jonathan's phone into a trash can on one of Baltimore's main streets, near the train station where hundreds of people passed by daily. She was sure that the phone would soon go to the landfill, and with it, the last evidence of communication with her. As the next week progressed, Emily tried to fit in as much as possible. She returned to work at the cafe, acting as if nothing unusual had happened. Her neighbors and co-workers didn't notice anything strange, and Emily showed no signs of worry or anxiety. She followed the clear plan she had made for herself from the beginning. Her mind remained calm as she firmly believed in the success of her plan. A few days had passed since Jonathan's disappearance, and his family was getting worried. His parents tried to contact him, but all calls went unanswered. They turned to Emily, hoping that she would be able to clarify the situation. Emily, undaunted, replied that she and Jonathan had recently had a fight, and he might have gone away for a while to be alone and clear his head. She reported that she thought he just needed time to come to his senses. Her words sounded convincing, and the parents decided to wait a few more days before taking any serious steps. However, as time went on and there was no news about Jonathan, his family became concerned. They filed a missing persons report with the police. Investigators took up the case, beginning by interviewing Jonathan's acquaintances and friends, and one of the first to arrive was, naturally, Emily. She met the police with an ostensible willingness to help, and repeated the same version about their quarrel and Jonathan's departure. Emily tried to remain confident and not show any nervousness. The police began to investigate Jonathan and Emily's apartment, interviewing neighbors and trying to find any information that might give an idea of what might have happened. Emily remained cool and emphasized her innocence without being uncooperative, which gave the police a certain confidence. At first, the investigation had no concrete leads, and all the details pointed to Jonathan's absence, but not to the violent nature of his disappearance. Despite her elaborate plan, the investigation began to notice some inconsistencies. Jonathan's friends described their relationship as extremely strained lately, and recalled Jonathan's repeated complaints about Emily's excessive control. The investigators were interested in this information and decided to talk to Emily again, asking more specific questions about the nature of their relationship. The situation around Jonathan's disappearance began to gradually escalate. With each passing day, the police officers dug deeper into his life, and his interest in Emily only grew. Several of Jonathan's friends and co-workers pointed to her control and jealousy, describing how she had become increasingly obsessive in the last months before his disappearance. All of this testimony led investigators to question the veracity of her story. At the same time, Jonathan's family insisted on a full review of his financial affairs, email correspondence, and social media activity, hoping to find some clue. Police officers obtained a warrant to review his bank accounts, phone records, and correspondence. That check yielded an unexpected finding. The last messages from Jonathan's phone were sent during the day when, according to Emily, he left after an argument. But the content of the messages was unusual. They seemed aloof, impersonal, as if written without any emotion. This interested investigators, who requested a detailed analysis of phone activity on the day of the disappearance. The experts noticed that Jonathan's device remained in the same neighborhood for several hours after the estimated time of his departure, and the last activity was recorded near Emily's home. This information wasn't enough to make an arrest, but it warranted a deeper probe. Investigators decided to bring in forensics to conduct a full sweep of the apartment and surrounding area. Armed with special tools to detect hidden traces of blood and biological materials, the forensic investigators began their examination. Despite the thorough cleaning, which Emily had no doubt done, traces of blood were found in the corners and hard-to-reach areas of the apartment. These small stains were invisible to the naked eye, but they were enough to realize there had likely been a struggle at the site. In the bathroom, subtle traces of biological materials were found on the tile seams, indicating that someone had tried to wash away large bloodstains. The sink also contained tissue residue, tiny fragments that were nearly impossible to wash away. Examination of the samples showed that the blood was indeed Jonathan's. Forensics continued the examination and found some hair that also belonged to him, but there were no visible signs of damage on the floor and wall surfaces, as if someone had tried to cover their tracks. These findings made Emily's situation much more difficult. The investigators took her statement again and asked her to explain the biological traces she had found. She tried to remain calm, but her answers were unconvincing. The ambiguity in her statement, the collection of minor inconsistencies, and her refusal to give direct answers led investigators to suspect that she was hiding something. In the meantime, detectives decided to check Emily's travel routes on the day of her disappearance. They requested data from surveillance cameras from the vicinity of her home, as well as from major roads leading to abandoned industrial areas on the outskirts of Baltimore. One of the most suspicious elements of the investigation was that her car was spotted in an area known for being empty and devoid of witnesses. She spent more than an hour there, which seemed odd, especially against the backdrop of her claims that she had not seen Jonathan since their altercation. Further analysis of the video footage revealed that Emily returned to the location several times over the next few days. The repeated trips only served to heighten police suspicions. Forensic officers, assembling a team, went to the site to conduct a full survey of the area. They examined every square meter, checking for any traces that might have been left by Emily's actions. Soon, they came across a small depression in the ground, hidden between the bushes. This hole had been recently buried and the ground looked loosened. Upon closer inspection, officers found several items in the ground, including fragments of clothing and plastic bags with unclear contents. Investigators immediately suspended work to call in forensics and pathology experts. The excavation confirmed the darkest fears. There were fragments of human remains in the ground. After DNA analysis, it was confirmed that they belonged to Jonathan. The investigation concluded that his body had been dismembered and hidden in bags, which Emily had distributed to different parts of the abandoned plot. This evidence was a turning point in the investigation. Having left enough material for the experts, the investigators went back to work on reconstructing the picture of the crime. With the help of the evidence found and data analysis, forensic investigators hypothesized that Jonathan had been killed in the apartment and that Emily had carefully prepared his body for transportation. Investigators obtained a search warrant for Emily's vehicle. Despite her careful attempts to cover her tracks, small traces of blood were still found in the car, indicating that the body had been transported. On the floor of the trunk, forensics found tiny bloodstains that were invisible to the casual eye. When forensic experts discovered the bloodstains in the trunk of Emily's car, the investigation had the missing piece of the puzzle. From that point on, investigators had a nearly complete picture of what happened to Jonathan. Investigators re-examined Emily's testimony, her demeanor, and the answers she had given during previous interrogations. The lies she had carefully constructed began to crumble, leaving less and less chance of exoneration. The police executed a warrant to search Emily's apartment again, this time including any hiding places that might have been missed earlier. The search was successful. A hidden box was found under the wooden floor in the bedroom, containing a knife, rubber gloves, and towels with blood residue. Forensic experts determined that the knife matched the size and shape of the wounds found on Jonathan's remains. Emily herself, who had not suspected that investigators would find the hiding place, was certain that all evidence had been destroyed. However, what was found only strengthened the prosecution's position. During the interrogations, it became clear that Emily was obsessed with the idea of having complete control over Jonathan's life. This became clear from her email correspondence, where there were frequent messages in which she accused him of lacking attention or interest in their relationship. In the months leading up to the murder, Emily began actively visiting psychology advice websites, interested in the topics of manipulation and addiction. Investigators found that she used this knowledge to keep Jonathan more and more attached to herself, isolating him from friends and family and gradually restricting his space. However, despite Emily's efforts to keep Jonathan, her control began to weaken. One day, Jonathan wrote to a friend that his relationship had become unbearable and he was thinking of breaking up, but did not know what to do for fear of Emily's unpredictable reaction. This message was crucial to understanding Emily's motives. Her fear of losing Jonathan and her jealousy had driven her to a breaking point, where the only solution, she thought, was destruction. The police soon received the results of the analysis of the items found at the crime scene. The towels and knife were covered in Jonathan's blood, and Emily's fingerprints were also found on them, despite her attempts to use gloves. Barely visible prints were also left on some areas inside the car, proving her presence at the crime scene and during the transportation of the body. Emily was arrested, and the prosecution charged her with several counts, including premeditated murder and destruction of evidence. When questioned, Emily, already realizing that she had no excuse, began to act reserved, but showed neither fear nor regret. She replied that she never regretted her actions, thus depriving her defenders of a chance to build a defense. On the basis of the accumulated evidence, the prosecutor prepared the prosecution, confident that her guilt was fully proven. At the trial, the prosecution presented all of the evidence collected, from the surveillance footage to the results of forensic tests. It didn't take the jury long to come to a unanimous verdict. Emily was found guilty of first-degree aggravated murder. The judge sentenced her to life in prison without parole.